Hello viewers, it's Josie. Welcome back to Eclectic Movie Reviews. And today I will be reviewing Drive My Car. Drive My Car is a Japanese film written and directed by Ryusuke Hamaguchi. It's nominated for 4 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director Ryusuke Hamaguchi, Best Adapted Screenplay Hamaguchi and Takamasa Oe, and Best International Feature Japan. It's based on a short story of the same title by acclaimed author Haruki Murakami. In one of the interviews with Hamaguchi, he mentioned that he didn't think the Drive My Car short story alone would be sufficient enough for a feature-length film. So he took aspects of other stories in Men Without Women, the Haruki Murakami short story collection from which Drive My Car is featured in, and incorporated them into the narrative. These stories being Scheherazade and Kino. The film follows an actor/theater director named Kafuku Yusuke, played by Hitoshi Nishijima, who is grieving the loss of his wife Oto, who died from a cerebral hemorrhage. Now, just so you know, I will be using the names Kafuku and Yusuke interchangeably because with a lot of Asian names, you get the surname first. Some movie reviews refer to him as Yusuke, and some refer to him as Kafuku. I'm gonna do it interchangeably. So, in spite of Oto having affairs with younger men, and she and Yusuke having a child who died, Yusuke still harbors deep love, respect, and affection for her. Oto was a playwright and TV writer. Kafuku is directing a multilingual production of Anton Chekhov's Uncle Vanya. The play sort of parallels what occurs in Yusuke's life. Yusuke's diagnosed with glaucoma, and he's advised by the doctor not to drive. The theater company he works with has a rule where they can't have their people drive to rehearsals due to a past incident. And under these circumstances, Yusuke gets a female driver named Misaki Watari, played by Toko Miura, to take him to and from rehearsals in the little red car. Now, prior to getting a driver assigned to him, he would rehearse his lines with tape recordings of his wife reading the lines in Uncle Vanya. And the car is essentially the last bit of memorabilia of Oto that Kafuku can hold on to. Initially, he's not entirely pleased with the idea of having a driver because he fears it'll interfere with his routine. But Misaki still lets Kafuku rehearse, and then he and Misaki develop a really special friendship, and it turns out she has a traumatic past as well. What unfolds is a very touching, moving story about finding peace and connection in the midst of processing grief and trauma. Now, prior to watching Drive My Car, I watched some of Ryusuke Hamaguchi's other films to prepare. And I watched his other film that was released in 2021 called Wheel of Fortune and Fantasy. That's, it's an anthology film. It's a collection of 3 films, and all very interesting. Then I put myself to the challenge and watched his 5-hour epic Happy Hour, or Happy 5 Hour. Now, please note that I did not watch it in one sitting. I watched it in chunks as if it were a TV miniseries. I jokingly called it the Japanese version of Big Little Lies because it was about women in their late 30s, mid to late 30s, early 40s. And then lastly, I watched Asaka 1 and 2. And I liked all these films. And They're deep psychological studies on intimacy and communication. They explore how ghosts of the past, personal constructed narratives, and chance and coincidence affect our intimate relationships. I love the way Hamaguchi makes intimate moments feel so epic, especially in Drive My Car and Happy Hour. The conversational scenes are shot in longer takes. According to typically, according to an article from Pen Magazine, Hamaguchi prioritizes the interplay of the actors and avoids separating shots in order to allow them the freedom to fully develop their character. This makes the conversations feel like they're taking place in real time. I know this is a review of Drive My Car, but there are two scenes in Happy Hour I want to bring up that are really cool. One is this long workshop sequence, like a personal growth workshop sequence, and it kind of reminds me of the rehearsals in Drive My Car. And then there's another scene in Happy Hour where I believe it's almost like 30 minutes of like a reading of like a student, because one of the women in Happy Hour is married to a college professor, and one of their students gives a reading, and it's just really cool how it's filmed with such long takes. Now, Hamaguchi also gives the settings for which the conversations takes place just as much importance as the characters themselves. He doesn't use that many close-ups of characters. You don't really see a lot of close-ups of people's faces. A cultural pattern, particularly among men in Japan, is the suppression of emotions. In these intimate interior spaces, whether that be a home or in this case a car, his characters are given the opportunity to say whatever they're hiding, but for most of the movie, hide it until they can't anymore. Although he's a relatively new filmmaker, while I watched these films, it felt like I was watching the filmography of a master who's been making films for decades. On that note, the cinematography in Drive My Car is breathtaking. The scenery of rural Japan that they drive through is gorgeous. One of my favorite shots in the film is when Yusuke and Misaki are on the boardwalk. Another beautiful shot is one on the bridge that sort of resembles the Golden Gate. What's interesting is that the short story takes place in Tokyo, and they were originally going to have the film set in Busan, Korea. However, COVID prevented that from happening. They decided to shoot in Hiroshima. From what I understand, they have a good theater scene. Raisuke Hamaguchi brought that up in one of the interviews. While shooting in Tokyo would have correlated with the short story plot-wise, Hamaguchi figured that it would be too noisy of a setting. It wouldn't be as intimate, if that makes sense. These circumstances actually ended up working out in the film team's favor because the cinematography wouldn't have had the same effect. And they also wouldn't have found a nice theater for them to shoot the play scenes. The setting of Hiroshima, in a way, connects to the themes of the film. Like the characters, Hiroshima is a city that has survived through a traumatic past. As far as the soundtrack, sorry Murakami fans, there's no Beatles. I know it's disappointing. In spite of that, the music composed by Eiko Ishibashi, while light and minimal, is quite beautiful. It's a mix of percussion and piano. It's soothing, meditative, uplifting, somber, and a bit jazzy at times. It's kind of like relaxing music you would hear at a coffee shop or Barnes & Noble. Vanessa Ague's essay in her review of the soundtrack, in her review, she says, highways are a never-ending cycle of cars whirring by, driving back and forth on an endless loop. Japanese multi-instrumentalist and composer Aiko Ishibashi's score for Drive My Car illuminates this cycle through rich melodies that patiently return and change over time. Despite the continuous renewal of material throughout the soundtrack, it's the delicate shifts tied together by the sound of cars rushing by on the highway that push the music ever forward. It's not much different than driving back and forth every day, returning to the same places only to find them a little changed. The performances by Hitoshi Nishijima and Toko Miura are outstanding. They both give subtle, internalized performances. While they both have emotional moments, neither of them break down with overly written dramatic monologues. People need to remember that acting isn't just about what's said, but what is not said. This is also a testament to the writing of these characters. In Deep Dive's movie review, they brought up how, hypothetically, if there was a bad American Hollywood version of this movie, there would be like sexual tension between Kafuku and the driver, and they probably would have made Misaki an aspiring actress or screenwriter, and then he would try to help her spread her wings and get into that area. No, they don't go down that road. No pun intended. Well, maybe. I'm so glad they didn't, because that would have been so cheap. Another excellent performance in this film is by Yu Rim Park. She plays a mute actress, part of the Uncle Vanya cast, who uses Korean Sign Language. When I watched her character sign, I got chills. As I mentioned earlier, the Uncle Vanya character arc parallels that of Kafuku. They are both 47-year-old men hopelessly clinging to the past with regrets. Tying back to the suppression of emotions being a common cultural pattern in Japan, the stage is the one place where Kafuku can really express these feelings outwardly. Well, it's important to note at first how Kafuku doesn't play Uncle Vanya at first. Someone else does. And then something happens where he then gets the role. I won't spoil how, but okay. Where was I? Not, yeah, so it's one place where he can express these feelings outwardly. Notwithstanding his talks with Misaki, of course. I also brought up the mute character who uses Korean Sign Language. She gives a life-affirming monologue from Uncle Vanya that really speaks to our times. The character arcs of... I don't want to, like... I don't want to, like, be one of those... Make one of those, like... Those critical, You know, like when film critics say, it's the movie we need right now. I think that's a little bit of a cliche way of selling a movie, but let's just say that the monologue she gives you can connect to now. The character arcs of Kafuku and Misaki parallel recent collective experiences, even if theirs is on a micro level. Similar to what we've gone through with COVID and now the war in Ukraine, Kafuku and Misaki are wrestling with trauma. Whether or not we've globally come together in the midst of a crisis is up for debate. There are instances of no's and yeses. While looking at the yes side of the equation with any humanitarian efforts, people in trauma support groups, whether online or in person, or even just people forming closer connections with their already at-home family members, you can certainly say that Kafuku and Misaki's friendship reflects that on a micro level, and the sign language monologue of the mute actress sums up that there is a Japanese philosophy called Wabi-Sabi, and it's the appreciation of the beauty in the imperfections of life. Kafuku and Misaki's journey correlate with that too. In this book right here, Wabi-Sabi for artists, designers, poets, and philosophers, Leonard Cohen explains 3 main lessons from Wabi-Sabi. Number 1 is that all things are impermanent. This relates to Kafuku having to come to terms with accepting that his marriage can't be permanent since his wife passed away. Korin refers to permanence here as an illusion. Yusuke is basically chasing an illusion in the form of closure with his dead wife. Number 2 is obviously that all things are imperfect. Although Oto had affairs, Kafuku still holds a place in his heart for her. Another example of this, though less obvious, is that the mute character who uses Korean Sign Language is not treated as lesser than, but rather embraced by her theatrical peers for her uniqueness. And then number 3 is that all things are incomplete. I'm sorry, I gotta grab my bookmark. Excuse me if I sound a little nasally. It's a bit like overcast and rainy where I am right now, so that may have an effect. So where was it? Okay. All things are incomplete. Both Kafuku and Misaki hold regrets from their past. Ideally, if they went back in time and made different decisions, they would feel more complete in their present day. Obviously, they can't do that. All they can do is live in the now, one of the essential characteristics of Wabi-Sabi. Another spiritual value of Wabi-Sabi, according to Korin, is that truth comes from the observation of nature. And as Yusuke and Misaki drive through the Japanese countryside, truths are unburied. To close out the Wabi-Sabi section of this review, I have to ask the question, is Drive My Car a perfect movie? No. In the short story, it's mentioned that they listened to the Beatles and Creedence Clearwater Revival in the car, so it would have been nice to hear some of that music for sure. Would have brought some, it would have spiced things up. Haruki Murakami is a big Beatles fan, and some of the titles for his works are inspired by Beatles songs like Drive My Car and Norwegian Wood. Then again, it can be very expensive for movies to get song rights, so I understand them not doing that for budgetary reasons. Also, it's a director decision. Even so, I still think the score really fits the movie, and I also really like the moments of silence and ambient sound in the film, and I think that maybe a rock song may have killed that. Also, without giving away any spoilers, I will say that the very last scene wasn't needed. It was a nice addition to the narrative, and it narratively made sense, but I think the film could have done without that one scene. Like, I still think the film would have had the same effect it already did. Those who've seen it will know what I'm talking about. The funny thing is that Ryusuke Hamaguchi himself said that he added that scene because he wanted the film to feel imperfect. A little bit of wabi-sabi on behalf of the director there. Nevertheless, applying a wabi-sabi state of mind, I still love Drive My Car, even with those minor nitpicks. This review of Drive My Car isn't even perfect. I sound nasally, and I stuttered a bit while reading. There was an article in The Atlantic by Lena Nee Coombs called Drive My Car Pushes the Limits of Language. She explains how the film transcends the power of language through the use of ambient sounds, moments of silence, and the nonverbal communication between Kafuku and Misaki. Additionally, She brings up the significance of the Uncle Vanya production being multilingual. She says, during rehearsals, not all the actors can understand what the others are saying, but the task Kafuku lays out for his multilingual cast is the same one that Hamaguchi lays out for his multilingual audience. Even if you don't understand all the words being spoken in the script, trust that the emotional response you have will be genuine. What we can see through this transcendence of words is how the opportunity for people to come together and heal goes beyond language and country. And oh, forgot, dropped a bookmark again. Sorry. And I think I know it's a little bit weird to end on like an article quote, but I think that's all I really have to say for this review of Drive My Car. Yeah, big recommendation. I would definitely recommend this movie for sure. It is currently streaming on HBO Max and playing in select art house theaters. And before I go, this is some fan art I drew of Drive My Car. And this is on my Instagram page. This was not easy to draw. The car, I still think the car could have been drawn better. It took a couple of tries. Just like a couple of tries, just like licenses. I drew the logo for Janus Films, the studio distributor, and then that's a symbol. Look, I wrote HBO Max on here. Yeah, it was a pleasure sharing this review with you all. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time. Goodbye for now. The links to my socials are in the description below. Thank you.